Hi, everyone. Oh, so good to see you. Look at the camera panning. It's so cool. So hi, everyone. And thank you, Sheridan, for that wonderful introduction. I am Zakiya Collier, and I'm so honored to be here in front of you. Last spring, or I think it was last spring, but I'm not really sure what time it is anymore. I had the opportunity to attend my first MARIC virtually. And so it's such an immense pleasure to return this year as your plenary speaker. But I do have to admit that I am deeply saddened that I'm unable to be there with you in person in Harrisonburg. But unfortunately, I am still recovering from COVID-19, which I had last week. And that has definitely been a journey that has been challenging as an immunocompromised person. And it's also been a very non-linear journey of some days I feel good and some days I don't. And so I'm really grateful to all of you and to the conference organizers for your flexibility and accommodations. And I just ask that you grant me additional grace and care as I press through COVID brain, which is a very, very real thing. Morning exhaustion, which I'm sure we're all dealing with, because 9 a.m. we like to pretend is not early, but that is still early. And some technical difficulties, which we hope not to have, but Zoom is Zoom, as I'm sure we've all learned over the past 2 years. And so I am going to share my screen and sing it like we all have done over the past 2 years. And I hope that you all are able to see this presentation. So I'm going to today try to clearly articulate some of my musings on memory work and the work that we do as archivists and community-based archives. It is my hope that my comments today will inspire us to continue doing or start or continue doing liberatory memory work and continuing doing so in a way that centers intentionally segregated, underserved, and disenfranchised Black and Latinx communities, to continue empowering community archives to empower themselves and bring validity, and to challenge the ways that we think about our profession and the work that we do. I believe that we all have a role and responsibility in combating white supremacy, dismantling oppressive systems, and building new frameworks that honor and recognize the humanity of those who have been intentionally harmed, neglected within existing systems. That role and responsibility may involve moving out of the way to allow communities to organize their own archival efforts. It may involve redistributing funds from wealthy white institutions to community-based archives and the communities your institution has harmed, and or supporting efforts and calls from communities for legal support, reparations, land reparation, or whatever else it may call for. As information professionals, we have been called out again and again for navel gazing and for being a missionary discipline that goes out to communities to help them to be a participant in a grant-funded project for which they didn't contribute to the grant narrative. This isn't something that hasn't been said before, but bears repeating, since just as anti-Blackness, colonialism, state-sanctioned violence, imperialism, etc., ditto, is ongoing, political education is also ongoing, in the words of Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, so that we might unlearn the harmful logics that structure our world and our profession. So I'll start by situating myself in relation to the work of wonderful colleagues and collaborators and co-conspirators whose work inspires me, resonates deeply within me, and challenges me to be a better collaborator, a better person, and a better memory worker. I'm constantly practicing and acknowledging my gratitude for being in community and relationship with such thought-filled, liberatory colleagues who have helped me to be the person who sits here before you. Your citation, I believe that your citation praxis tells the world where you stand, with whom you stand, and what you stand for. And so while this isn't everyone, if you think you hear the influence of these folks in my presentation, you most certainly do. And so I stand, and I also stand with them. And those folks are Tanya Sutherland, Jared Drake, Burgess Jules, Stacey Williams, Michelle Caswell, Grayson Bromeyer, Itza Carvajal, Sarita Gates, Joyce Leanne, Miriam Kaba, Shannon O'Neill, Camille Lawrence, Holly Smith, Makiba Foster, Lael Hughes Watkins, Micah Brodnax, Sarah Ann Adams, Kimberly Springer, Aaron Glasgow, Stephen Fullwood, Keandra Bills Freeman, and Shanta Smith Cruz. And that's certainly not exhaustive. And so as the theme of our gathering for this conference is communities big and small, I'll also situate myself within my own communities and my relationship to the concept and practice of community, so that it is clear that my musings are not ethereal, but based on my own experiences as a person and as an archivist. So I'm the daughter of a mother that understood the importance of community. From K3, and so 3-year-old kindergarten to regular kindergarten at 5 years old, I attended an all-Black Christian school. I won't say the name because that's a security question. But when my mother worked double shifts, I often spent the night with my K3 teacher. And that was through a relationship that was established within that community. My mother herself was sort of adopted as a goddaughter by one of her teachers who was the photographer of the photos of my mom as a child that she so deeply treasures today. When I was in elementary school, my mother made sure that after my first grade year with the teacher that the Whisper networks called racist, my mother made sure that somehow, some way that my 2nd through 5th grade teachers were Black. She made sure she had a relationship with them so that she could collaboratively make sure that they could collaboratively make sure that I was learning, being challenged, and behaving. I wasn't, but because of that relationship, I was held accountable swiftly and every single time. I also grew up in a large, maybe mega Southern Black church. When I say I grew up there, I mean that I probably spent more time at church than I did my own house. I hated it back then, and I don't identify with any organized religion now, but the influence on my relationship to community as a practice is undeniable. I was just telling my neighbor recently, another Southern church girl, that it wasn't until recently that I recognized the power of the influence that church had on my life. Respectability, homophobia, abuse, etc. aside, because those also had an influence. Having a church family outside of my own family and my neighborhood friends allowed me to have other people who cared and supported me when my home situation wasn't the best, or when my school friends turned on me, or when I was being bullied at school. I also understood a lot more about my city and how it looked differently for different people based on where they lived, how they looked, what schools they attended, what jobs they had access to. And that expanded my world larger than just home and school. Speaking of neighbors, I'm also really close with mine. When Hurricane Ida flooded 6 feet of water into my building's basement last September, it was my neighbor who banged on my door to let me know. It was me calling the neighbor with the basement apartment to make sure he was okay. It was all of my neighbors on my block standing in thigh-high, dirty New York City water to clear drains and help folks to safety. It was the neighbors in my building and I breaking into the basement window to help my neighbor recover some of his items without even thinking twice about the possibility of danger and gas after a flood. It was me using my own archival knowledge in my apartment to preserve and conserve precious documents like my neighbor's grandmother's obituary. So personally, I know a thing or 10 about communities, both big and small. And professionally, I'm an individual who has never learned about a job, joined a committee, found out about a scholarship or fellowship opportunity, or anything else on my own. And in a world filled with nepotism and a disdain for affirmative action, that feels really weird to say. However, I know that I was not given anything because I know the right people. Rather, I've built intentional professional relationships in which I actually talk to people, have real conversations, and bring my full self to the table so that people know my values, my interests, my needs, and my desires, and we work together to meet them just as we would do for their own needs and desires, both personal and professional. That has led me to working as a project archivist, a processing archivist, an oral history intern, an advisory board member, a community board member, a community manager, reference adjunct, reference and instruction grad assistant. I've worked in feminist archives, Black research institutions, cultural heritage centers, queer archives, community-based archives, academic archives. I've worked with linked data, web archives, digital archives, oral histories, feminist collections, Black collections, organizing materials, with, and, et cetera, et cetera. And with all of these experiences, I have come to learn so much about this profession, memory work, and the tireless work of community-based archives. Lastly, I will situate myself in this current time, and in this case, linear time, but also non-linear, because in the words of Chicago R&B and neo-soul artist Jamila Woods, look at what they did to my sisters last century, last week. They put her body in a jar and forget her. They love how it repeats, referencing Henrietta Lacks. And so today is March 25th, 2022. And couple centuries ago in 1634 on today, English colonists were sent by Lord Baltimore to present day Maryland, just a few paces away from where you all are today. About 300 years later in 1931, today was the day that the Scottsboro boys were accused of raping two white women in Scottsboro, Alabama. About 30 years later, in 1965, Martin Luther King led 2,500 people to Alabama State Capitol in Montgomery after the Selma March, which lasted 5 days, to protest the denial of voting rights for Black people. And then in 2010, Defense Secretary Robert Gates approved new rules easing enforcement of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell ban on gays serving openly in the military. And this only raised the threshold for what was appropriate to investigate homosexual behavior. And so not completely getting rid of the rules. That was in 2010. And today, it is early here on the East Coast of the US. And so we don't yet know what today holds, but we do know that there are ongoing struggles for liberation, for legal and material reparations, for abolition, decolonization, anti-imperialism, and all of these things let us know that these issues are not in the past, and there is work to be done, and that is our work too. When I think about this work, I think of a couple of terms. Community, which of course is the theme of this weekend's conference, accountability and care, collective efforts, and abolishing and building. So I'm gonna go off script a little bit to kind of talk about some examples of things that have inspired me or work that I have done that sort of exemplifies some of these concepts. All right, So community, such a big word, a convoluted word. And there's so many different definitions. We use it in the singular, we use it in the plural. I typically like to use it in the plural to think about the ways that, so communities are overlapping, as I've described myself, so many different communities that I find myself a part of, participating in, or like maybe I'm a part of a community now and I'm not later. And so I think for me, if I had to define community, it's something of a care for each other, or a group of people who are there for similar reasons or towards a similar goal, and that are accountable to each other, which is why I'm going to talk about accountability in a little bit. And I just really love this picture, and that's why this is here, because it just reminds me of community. There's laughter, there's warmth, and there's this holding of hands in solidarity and experiencing things together and alongside each other. I'm also going to use a series of tweets from myself or about myself, because I love Twitter, and I feel like a lot of, like I said, political education bears repeating. And so a lot of these things I've already said on Twitter. So like, why not include it in the presentation? And for tweets that are not mine, I have asked for permission. And also, as a person who is working in ethical social media documentation, again, why not use tweets? Okay. I said on October 4th, 2021, things are done better in conversation and community. And so including this because I do really stand by what I say, so much so that someone else has heard me say it and has tweeted about it. And so one area of community-based memory work that I had the privilege of working in is working on the hashtag Schomburg Syllabus project for 2 years at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is a part of the New York Public Library. The hashtag Schomburg Syllabus project was a project that archives, web archives, Black authored and Black related online educational materials to document Black studies, Black movements, experiences, et cetera, in the 21st century. And in connecting, and I also work to connect these web archive resources to the Schomburg Center's very own unique materials in order to honor and recognize both the source and strength of Black self-education practices, collective study, and librarianship. So that was a lot of words, and I just literally read the description for the project that you could find on NYPL's website. But the project was one that involved, first and foremost, web archiving hashtag syllabi, which are online syllabi that, as for the most part, started on Twitter and sort of became stable websites. But these hashtags and like the syllabi, people sort of crowdsourced and added resources to contextualize the things that were going on around them, mostly in response to social injustice and police violence, with the first, the hashtag Ferguson syllabus being in response to the murder by the police of Michael Brown in 2014. So the project sort of evolved from the efforts of one of my dear colleagues and co-conspirators, Makiba Foster, who found it important to begin archiving these syllabi that were popping up in response to things that were happening. And so we have the hashtag Ferguson, we have a hashtag Pulse Orlando syllabus, we have a hashtag Charleston, and sort of just seeing community members coming together, educators, independent scholars, students, just people on Twitter who have an interest and know of resources coming together to contextualize a moment for themselves and others, so that they just know what's going on and are able to respond in a way that is informed, that that is supported, and just really wanting to do this work together. And also creating resources for our youth to understand what is going on around them, as they were not here to experience some of the things that we have that serve as a precedent to sort of newer incidents of police violence. And so Makiba Foster began web archiving these in 2017. I got to the Schomburg in 2019 and sort of continued that work and continued describing these syllabi and making them available through Archive It, so that not only do we have sort of like the moment in which these syllabi were created, but also seeing how they've evolved over time into sort of more stable syllabi, and then also recognizing the similarities between the collective and self-education practices that minoritized and marginalized communities have always used when their histories have been left out of archives and out of textbooks. And so that this is what you see here is one of those syllabi, sort of responding to the Dakota Access Pipeline situation in 2016. Whoa. Okay, in 2016, and this was sort of created by a group of students coming together and really wanting to contextualize and educate themselves and others on what is actually going on. So this is just one example of one of these syllabi that are both collaborative, celebrate self-education, self-determination and help, and then also self-recognition of like our own histories that do have a precedent. Here is another one, a little bit closer to where you all are right now, the Charlottesville Syllabus, also created by students, University of Virginia Graduate Student Coalition for Liberation, awesome name, in 2017. And here is sort of what was created at the end of the project that sort of combines these syllabi with other materials at the Schomburg that may be, that have topics that are connected to whatever the syllabus is about. So there are syllabi on Afrofuturism, #syllabi on Black feminism, as people just sort of began or built on using their platforms to, you know, create a syllabus about anything. I created a syllabus for myself last year. I did not get through it, but it is ongoing. The books are still behind me, and so I'll read them at some point. But, you know, sort of like there's this this moment of like syllabi and self-education that this project honors, that history and the community of people who contribute to these syllabi. And this is just sort of a view of what it looks like once you click into one of those images from the previous page. All right, so accountability. Here is another image. And this one I chose because I accountability, I have in parentheses care, because I think they go hand in hand. And it involves a sort of tending to, as we see here, in the same way that you tend to a plant, you tend to the people that you are in community with, and making sure that their needs are met and that you know, harms are addressed. And so I thought this was a beautiful picture to represent that. And here's another tweet, brought to you by me from just last week. So, you know, while I was sort of sick, it was brought to my attention that there was a position posted for a library investigator with my former employer, and I was pissed off. to say the least. And I don't know if you've ever been upset while you're also sick, but it engenders a like special kind of anger and like disappointment. And so, yeah, I was being very sarcastic and snarky and like calling it out because accountability. I care deeply about this profession, about libraries, and about people who could potentially be harmed by a position that is essentially a very carceral, like police and libraries position. And so here's just a tweet of me calling out what I see to be a harmful new position that also is harmful to librarians who work within that system, who get paid less than this new person would get paid. So yes, tweet brought to you by me. And also going to use something brought to you by me and other beloved Black memory workers from a call to action that we published in June of 2020. It was called the call to action of archiving state-sanctioned violence against Black people. And it was published on Medium, on the Sustainable Futures blog. And this particular piece sort of came out of my own questioning of like, I'm doing web archiving at the Schomburg Center. I have the tools to do that work. And we are now in this moment of, there's a lot of state-sanctioned violence happening, but also it's COVID is happening and these things are happening at the same time. People are calling it sort of the double pandemics, even though I don't subscribe to state-sanctioned violence being a pandemic because we have choice in that. There are people who decide to harm people. And so not so much a pandemic, but ongoing attacks on Black people and people of color, in that with COVID-19, as we all may remember and still continue to see the disproportionate effects or lack of access in Black communities and other marginalized communities. And so this particular, like I mentioned, I had sort of questions myself of like, what should I be web archiving? Like, if I want to like think about the Black experience of COVID-19 and the Black experience of state-sanctioned violence, and also think about not trying to web archive the entire internet and thinking about the actual physical space that web archives take up in servers that are actually on land and take up more space, and being intentional about the work and knowing that I'll have to get consent from people for what I do web archive. And like, it just became overwhelming. There were so many things happening, so many changes. And I was also experiencing this same pandemic as everyone else, as a Black person as well. And so I reached out to other Black memory workers of like, essentially, what the hell should I be doing? Like, how can we do this together? You know, I just feel overwhelmed by being one person trying to decide all of these things. And so one thing that came out of it is sort of, I'm just gonna put my mouse over it, this sentence here: we commit to archival practices that support accountability and historical accuracy, because when the dust settles, attempts will be made to rewrite history. And so acknowledging that one particular use of this collection could be for documenting the experiences of Black people that could then be used later on in seeking redress legally or materially or in whatever way. Seeing this not just as a research collection because it's held at a research institution, but recognizing its ability to to serve, people wanting to see exactly how they experience and remember how they experience the pandemic and state-sanctioned violence, and then also wanting it to be available to people who may find it useful in seeking accountability for harm that they have been on the receiving end of. And so that's what the COVID-19 collection at the Schomburg Center became, is sort of like this mix of joyous moments, people dancing at protests, or the reason for the protests at all, or the ways that communities had to step up and meet their own needs as far as providing access to COVID testing and COVID vaccines, and because it wasn't being done for them in their communities, where in other communities you could not turn a corner without seeing a COVID testing site. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of one perspective of accountability for archives and in this work. And I think I personally look to Miriam Kaba and other colleagues for to guide me in terms of thinking about accountability and avoiding carcerality and carceral systems in seeking accountability, and also in learning about the ways that being in relationship and being in community with someone is how accountability actually works, because you're able to feel responsible to that person and want to be better. And so in thinking about our work as archivists in relationship to each other, and also when doing work with community-based archives, I think it's just so important to that these relationships be real, so that there are opportunities and the sort of mechanisms to have accountability and to sort of meet the needs after harms may have happened. Archivist to archivist harm, institution to community harm, archive to community harm, person to person. All of these things are to be considered in sort of this work with community-based archives, with just communities, and thinking about who is actually going to be responsible for meeting the needs of, once a harm has been caused. And so I take particular inspiration, in addition to Miriam Kaba, from Don't Shoot Portland, which is a organization, collective of people, community members who have dialogues, who do community forums and workshops and exhibitions, and that focus on history and archiving and advocating for people who are facing racism and discrimination. And they also provide legal representation and direct advocacy. And so this is just an image from a recent exhibition called Archives for Black Lives, a Liberated Archives exhibition. And featured on the walls, which you can't really see too clearly, are documents that they were obtained in collaboration with the City of Portland Archives, but these are documents that sort of speak to the current systems that are oppressive. And as Tressa Rayford of Don't Shoot Portland, she and I had a conversation on Tuesday, and she says that we have to use these documents, use even our own archives that may be held in institutions that we're working with, to indict the system. And so that's what sort of these documents on the wall are doing, is sort of providing evidence, not for evidence of history and things that have happened in a sort of broad ethereal sense, but like actually providing evidence of like these systems are trash and here's the proof. And this is how we're going to undo that and make these documents available to people who are pursuing accountability through whatever ways they are choosing to do so. And so there's the question for us of like, how can we use archives for more than just evidence of like this neutral history? We have long debunked neutrality in our profession, but how can we sort of work actively to preserve materials, because we are preserving them constantly, but like, how can we consider for what, for whom, and how can they be used to serve more than just researchers and for just more than just institutional purposes? And how can we use them to hold ourselves accountable as a profession, as well as hold our institutions accountable? All right, so collective efforts. So here we are, we have another historic photo of the Afro newspaper Clean Block campaign in Baltimore, Maryland in 1935. And as you'll see, everybody is doing their part. And also, you see back here, you know, some people get to chill. Everybody has their own part. We don't know what this person's role is, but they're chilling and that's okay. But as you see, these young ladies have brooms and are doing their part to clean up their community. And so collective efforts. Another tweet from me, which kind of got more, this is from about a year ago, and it got some more attention last night because I like replied to it trying to make it all cute and like in roll up fashion. And then Twitter told me it has been too long. This tweet is too old. I've tweeted apparently more than 2,000 tweets since this was posted. And so it just didn't work. Anyways, so this particular tweet is a tweet thread was called a little grant rant because I was like really fed up with the way that granting happens in our profession. And so I posed a few questions for institutions to think about as they are writing grants, receiving grants, and looking to work with community partners. And so some of the questions are like, are all the stakeholders involved and not just leadership and administration? You know, collective effort means all of the people who are going to have to be involved with this grant need to be able to contribute and sign off and think about the actual grant narrative, and if that's something that they want to contribute their labor to. As a person who has worked in many project positions, I've found on my side of it that people don't always know what was written into the grant, and then they aren't exactly supportive of it because they have other things to do because everybody's already overworked and under-resourced. And then it makes it a lot harder on people trying to get things done because it just hasn't been done as a collective effort, which is a detriment to the person who has to like try to wield all these people and bring them all together, but also to the project itself when people aren't completely bought in and aren't contributing maybe their best work to it. And so just making sure that everyone, no matter how small the role, has had an opportunity to say like, I understand this is my job at this institution, but like, I feel a little uneasy about this particular part of the grant narrative, or like, will I be given extra time to do this because all of these other timelines are overlapping and like, this is just not possible. And so thinking about that. Also thinking about if it aligns with other things that are going on at the institution. I've seen a number of projects that are like, we want to reach out, the archives wants to reach out to community members and get them to like, maybe let us digitize material and then they get to keep it, you know, because this community is disappearing in this area. But the reason the community is disappearing is because the institution is displacing them. and that those two things just don't go together. And so thinking about this has to be sort of a collective effort. It can't be that the archives are trying to preserve this community while development is like trying to build a new building that would completely wipe out the people who are going to be, their collection materials are now in the repository, but the people are not even around to be able to visit the institution and engage with those materials or even activate them in programming and within their communities. And so thinking about how all these things are working together, because we are not in isolation in any of this work. And then also thinking about collective efforts in the ways that we seek funding and with community partners. So, I mean, a lot of grants are like, we're gonna work with these particular community members, but those are also people who need to sign off on their participation before the grant is written and before the project gets started, and making sure that it aligns with who they are and what they want to be doing, and not just later on being like, hey, we have $25 for you to participate in this project that we've already written, and we just need this little bit of participation from you. Because to me, that still seems extractive and is not actually repairing the harm that many of these projects seek to do. So a quote from a colleague, because I love to cite my colleagues. And this is from Yusuf Omawale from the Southern California Library for Social Studies and Research, from a piece called We Already Are, in which they sort of talk about sustainability being a need for community organizations and not this sort of like outreach from larger organizations to benefit mostly the larger organization in feeling better about the work that they have done or the work that they've done that has harmed surrounding communities over time. And so there's a need to see our work as everybody doing their part, but like understanding that we are doing the work together. And so an institution working to undo their harm doesn't have to mean like taking over a small community archive that may be underfunded, but finding ways to redistribute wealth from a larger institution to that institution is helpful, but they can also continue to run their own institutions and just need help with the sustainability part, because the funding goes to usually institutions that are already stable. And so, yeah, just seeing the work of taking personal and institutional responsibility as doing a part of a collective effort. In Michelle Caswell's recent text of Urgent Archives, she talks about doing this work and doing our own work in archives as contributing to that legal and material redress. And so working to make sure the processes that we do every day, for example, archival describing materials that would help in legal claims in a way that people can access them and understand that these materials might be helpful for a particular legal claim, or providing space and a platform for people to discuss their own efforts to redress the harms that have happened in their own communities, and giving people the space to activate records that are already in the archives, but it doesn't have to always be us. Especially if it's not about our own histories. And so all that to say, what that has looked like in my own work is always collaborating on everything. And seeing that as a way of undoing the logic of academia and also our profession of like just one person doing the thing that involves publishing. Like I have a couple of pieces coming out and they are all co-authored pieces because I do truly believe that things are done better in community and conversation. That looks like working on projects with people and like allowing people to have me on call if they need somebody to tap into a project. That involves now being the community manager for Documenting the Now and understanding that projects and efforts to be ethical become more sustainable when done in community. And then also working as a part of Shift Collective. And so, yes, sustainability is a collective and cooperative effort. And so that leads me to sort of my last thoughts. Here's an image from Weeksville Heritage Center where I've worked, as we have some folks here restoring a historic Weeksville house together. You know, everybody's doing their part. And I leave with sort of 3 words, but to say that I am not only hoping for a better world, but I'm wanting a better world, and that makes me work for it. And so that work leads me to these 3 closing words: redistribute, abolish, and build. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zakiya. That was incredible. And just for everyone here, we do have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Because of Zoom logistics, I do need to give you the mic so that our speaker can hear it. So if anyone has any questions, bring them up and I will bring this to you. And I'm blind, so please wave. Can you hear all right?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for your talk. So my question is, how have community members engaged with you in doing memory work? How have they been comfortable, uncomfortable, and how do you navigate those conversations?
That's a great question. I think I will start by saying I think there's always a level of discomfort in addressing something that's new or, you know, entering into like a new community partnership with people or relationship. And I think it a lot of times it works well as it happens organically, of like genuinely getting to know people, not for the purpose of doing a project or for the purpose of collaborating, seeing that as a possibility, because I tend to collaborate with everybody in my world. I'm always trying to rope somebody into something, and always like referring people to something that I find useful or like that I think like would be generative for them or for the project. And like, of course, people could say no, but sort of organically just building relationships and then, or having conversations, and then out of that, a potential collaboration or, you know, questions arise about like the work that I do, and I give answers, and then people are like, oh, I do something like that. I would love to like do with this together. But there is like the discomfort of, and sometimes the conflict of knowing how things are done in the profession versus how a community organization might do things. And at times having to negotiate that and say, okay, I understand, you know, the way that you're doing things. Everything is not meant to be preserved forever. And sometimes that changes over time. You want something preserved now and later you don't, or vice versa. And so negotiating that in the same way that I would negotiate that in any other relationship of like, I explain my thoughts, they explain theirs, we come to a resolution, we agree to disagree, and go from there.
Hi, Zakiya, it's Keandra. If you probably can't see me on the, on the screen, you know how much I love your work, big fan. I wanted to know, what is the most joyful part of the work that you do?
Ooh, what a good question. The most joyful part. I think just seeing the impact that it has on myself and others in like the moments of joy and laughter and coming together, and you know, like even referring to the last question, when it does become difficult and trying to negotiate like professional versus like how things actually get done, and why in my bio it says I think cooperation and improvisation, because sometimes the solution is not what is professionally advised, and like that is what that particular organization needs. But like those moments where we're like, we're not doing that, and we're like on the same page and we're laughing and we're like just having a good time doing the work in a way that doesn't feel like robotic or cold, or like it just feels good to be doing things together. And that's why I like say the word collaborate or collective or cooperate like all day, every day, because I like actually enjoy just the energy that comes from like having two or more people deciding a thing together or doing a thing together, and like just feeling good about each other's energy.
Good morning. I think, okay, that's better. I wanted to thank you. I also wanted to say I really appreciated how you were able to create the connectivity between all of the different parts of the archival profession, which I think a lot of us struggle with. But my question's about the grant writing. So for a lot of archivists, we're kind of surprised we have to write grants, right? We're not prepped for that. We're not really sure what it is. More and more, especially larger institutions, are hiring grant writers to do it, which takes it even a further step away. So are there thoughts or conversations that you've had about changing the requirements that the grant funding institutions are doing to make sure that they've talked to the communities they want to work with, or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I would love to see from granting institutions, of like, before you submit this application saying you're going to do this work with this set of people, like, and I've seen some of this practice of like, there needs to be a statement from all partners, or, you know, commitment letters from, you know, participants. I've seen that, but I think there should maybe be an additional requirement of like, have the partners seen the entire narrative, you know, like to know what's going on, and like, there looks like there's like a very large amount of money going to like this, and we're only getting this to do a larger amount of work. So like budget transparency. I think I would love to see that on the side of the grantors. And I would also love to see, like you mentioned, you know, this work being sort of delegated to grant writers and not with the people who are actually going to be doing the work, which then creates all this tension and like, we can't do that. We don't have the resources. We don't have the money. And then there's like all of this tension going on. I see it all the time. I felt it myself of like, who wrote this grant? Because this doesn't make any sense. So it's like for how the work actually needs to get done, this just doesn't work. So I would love to see more collaboration on that front, and grace from grantors or from grant writers in working with archivists. Of course, knowing that we do still have a lot of work to do, and grant writing adds to that load, but like being graceful and providing time to actually review the grants together and like talk through and even possibly learn the tricks of the trade of grant writing and like how to write a successful grant. I think there just has to be more space for collaboration on that front of like, do not write a grant on my behalf without me seeing it and like contributing to it. Because then we get wonky projects or like things that just can't be completed, or doesn't do the necessary work that is needed to be done in the most like effective and caring and thoughtful way.
All right, well, we are exactly at time. So Zakiya, thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it.